Okay, so we're going to talk about radical Reconstruction. And before we talked about early Reconstruction efforts, we talked about Lincoln's proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction. We talked a little bit about Johnson's, followed Lincoln's pretty much to the letter, but he changed a couple things. And today we're going to talk about radical Reconstruction and those that did not believe that the plan would work, and they decided that they wanted to change that. So the first thing we want to do is set up our notes. Our title is going to be Radical Reconstruction. And our essential question is, what was the Radical Reconstruction? So remember, your main notes go in this section here. Your questions over here, you're going to do about four of them. Go in this section, and your summary goes down here. All of this should be completed when you come into class tomorrow. So the first thing we need to talk about are what are called black codes. And Johnson, in his presidency, changed the proclamation of amnesty to allow the southern states to pass what are called black codes, which are laws that limited the rights of freedmen. So it basically forbade them to vote, own guns, and serve on juries, among many other things. And it meant to keep the freedmen from gaining political power. So we can kind of see where this is already going to become a problem. So this led to what I call the gripes of the Republicans. So Johnson's plan, like I said before, had encouraged Southern legislatures to pass the black codes, which led to violence against freedmen. So there were a lot of riots, there were people getting robbed. It was just basically a bad situation. So as a result, the radical Republicans, who we will talk about in class, vowed to take control of this Reconstruction idea. So they formed what's called the Radical Reconstruction Congress. And the goals, they had two goals. They were to break the power of the wealthy planters in the South who ruled the South, and to ensure that freedmen gained the right to vote. So they did two things. They created the Civil Rights Act, which gave citizenship to African Americans, which Johnson, of course, vetoed because he didn't want this happening, but the Congress overrode him. And this is kind of when they figure out that they can kind of control what happens in Congress, because they'll just veto what Johnson does, but the Congress can override it. And because the Congress at this point was so weak and was represented by most people in the North, which were mostly Republicans, they had a lot of control. And that's how this whole process can start, and how they are now going to control the Reconstruction process. The second thing they passed was the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States were citizens. But this was not really ratified for another 2 years, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And any state that denied any male citizen the right to vote would have its representation in Congress reduced, or in some cases revoked. It would go away. They'd have no representation. So basically what this led to was a Republican majority in Congress. So whatever the Republicans wanted, they were able to pass because of this majority. And it had a great impact on the South. They called it the Radical Reconstruction. And the Congress, which was majority Republican, passed the Reconstruction Act, which threw out the state governments that refused to ratify the 14th Amendment. So if they didn't ratify the 14th Amendment, they could not have a government. Another thing this did was divided the South into military districts, and they had military leaders, most of which had served in the war. And the Confederate States had to write new constitutions that had the 14th Amendment in them. So a lot of these problems and this controversy now revolves around the 14th Amendment and giving those freedmen the right to vote and citizenship. So this leads to the impeachment of Johnson. So to impeach someone means to bring formal charges against, and they can be impeached for treason, bribery, or what are called high crimes and misdemeanors. And if 2/3 majority vote in the Senate, the president is removed from office and the vice president takes over. As a result, though, to make matters short, Johnson was found not guilty, and it was about 35 to 19 to convict, which was one shy of what was needed. They needed 36 votes. And most people thought they couldn't remove a president just because they didn't agree with what he thought. And so what we get to is the election of 1868, and Ulysses S. Grant is going to win the Republican vote. And he's also easily going to win the vote with a large amount of support from both North and South. Remember, the majority of voters are now Republicans. And so he passes the 15th Amendment, which cannot deny any citizen the right to vote. And so he gave a lot of reasons to support. So the sacrifice by the African Americans in the war was a reason to support this amendment. It would impact the vote for the Republicans because it gives them what they want. And, of course, it will not be completely enforced until the mid-1900s when the whole voting rights comes back around again. And that's the end.